In 1942, on a blistering North African desert, the outcome of the war hung by a thread. Axis tanks roared, Allied lines were crumbling, and then waves of African soldiers poured in, on foot, on trucks, under sandstorms, to stand between conquest and collapse. Without them, the Allies would have lost. What you were not told in many history books is how African soldiers, colonial fighters, laborers, scouts, stretcher-bearers, changed the course of World War II before this story unfolds. If you love untold history, stay with me till the end. Hit like, subscribe to Whisper the Past, drop a comment, share this video. It takes seconds, but keeps memory alive. And once we finish, check out our other videos, because history is never just what you were taught. In the 1930s, most of Africa was under colonial rule. British, French, Belgian, Italian powers carved up the land. But the people were not just spectators. They were the unseen foundation. When war broke out in Europe in 1939, colonial administrations in Africa said yes to the call. In British colonies from Nigeria to Kenya, in French West Africa, in the Belgian Congo, men enlisted, regiments formed, labor corps organized, Africans marched, loaded, walked, stitched, carried. But African soldiers faced a dual war, one against fascism abroad and one against prejudice at home. They missed promotions. They were paid less. They were often conscripted, forced, treated as second class. Yet despite it all, many thousands raised their rifles, their spirits. Nigeria raised infantry regiments. Over 45,000 Nigerian soldiers served under British. In Africa, in India, in Burma, French West Africa sent thousands of Senegalese tirailleurs. Belgian Congo supplied men, carriers, porters. East Africa's King's African Rifles marched in dusty boots. African Labor Corps built roads, laid rail, loaded ammunition. They were supply lines that kept front alive. But none of them did this for glory. Most did it under orders, some out of loyalty, many out of hope. Hope that in winning the world's war, they might also win respect, a better life after. In 1940 to 41, the war moved into Africa. Italy attacked from Ethiopia into British Somaliland. French colonies in West Africa were torn by Vichy influence. British and Commonwealth forces were stretched thin. African soldiers were recruited fast, some voluntarily, others conscripted. They trained for harsh desert warfare, for jungle, for mountain, anything. One bright moment came in East Africa. In 1941, a coalition of British, Ethiopian, South African, Indian, and African colonial troops marched south from British Somaliland through Eritrea and Ethiopia to reclaim Addis Ababa from Italian occupation. Africans fought in every battalion. They endured malaria, heat, hunger. They walked miles. They stormed hills. Each victory there mattered. Italy's hold in East Africa crumbled. The supply route to North Africa opened. The Axis lost bases. The stage was being set. But perhaps the greatest test was in North Africa, in the deserts of Libya, Egypt, Tunisia. By late 1942, the Axis was closing in on Cairo. The British 8th Army was battered. Without reinforcements to fall. Enter the Africans in uniform, the Free French colonial units, the South Africans, Rhodesians, Sudanese, Algerians, Moroccans, Tunisians, Kenyans, Nigerians. They held the flanks. They carried supplies across the desert. They marched into the teeth of Rommel's Afrika Korps and stood their ground. In battles like El Alamein and Gazala at the Marred Line, they were part of what cracked the Axis momentum. Take one example. Job Masiko, a South African with the Native Military Corps, captured by Axis at Tobruk. He did something extraordinary. He sabotaged a German ship in port, using a milk tin, explosives, and courage. That act didn't just destroy transport. It struck a blow to morale, showing German control was not total. Also, African carriers, engineers, stretcher-bearers bore the unbearable. When supply lines stretched hundreds of miles across desert, African soldiers carried water, fuel, ammunition, digging, repairing, digging again. Without that logistic chain, the front would have collapsed. By late 1942 into 1943, the Allies boosted by African manpower, material, and sacrifice, began to push Axis back. At El Alamein, Montgomery's 8th Army, bolstered by African units, turned the tide. From then on, Africa was not just a battlefield. It was a pivot point. While North Africa burned under Rommel's tanks, another war raged quietly in the east. From the Horn of Africa to the jungles of Madagascar, Africans were fighting to reclaim their soil from fascist occupation. In 1940, Mussolini's armies invaded British Somaliland and Kenya's borders. But soon, African battalions struck back. The King's African Rifles, made up of men from Kenya, Uganda, Nyasaland, and Tanganyika, marched through unforgiving terrain. They crossed deserts, scaled mountains, ambushed enemy convoys. These weren't professional European divisions. They were farmers, herdsmen, miners, suddenly thrust into a world war they didn't start. Yet they fought like men defending home. At the Battle of Keren in Eritrea, African troops endured impossible conditions, jagged cliffs, blazing heat, German-trained Italian defenses. But they kept climbing, fighting yard by yard until victory was won. When Addis Ababa was liberated in 1941, Emperor Haile Selassie rode triumphantly back into his capital, not alone, but escorted by African soldiers who had bled to free his homeland. And further south, on the island of Madagascar, another hidden campaign unfolded. In 1942, the British, with African regiments among them, stormed the island to deny it to Vichy France and Japanese submarines. They fought through jungles, swamps, and malaria until the island fell. These forgotten victories in East Africa and the Indian Ocean were not small. They reopened shipping routes. They forced Axis powers out of the continent's eastern gateway. And most of all, they proved that African troops could do what Europe said they couldn't: win modern wars. From the deserts, some African soldiers were shipped thousands of miles away to a land they'd never seen, fighting an enemy they'd never met. That land was Burma. Between 1942 and 1945, over 90,000 African troops from West and East Africa served in the jungles of Southeast Asia under the British 14th Army. Nigerians, Ghanaians, Kenyans, and Ugandans marched side by side through leech-filled swamps, fighting the Japanese. They built bridges through monsoon rains. They hacked paths through bamboo forests where every shadow could be a sniper. They faced diseases, starvation, and exhaustion, yet they never broke. The British officers who once doubted them now wrote with awe, calling them disciplined, fearless, and patient beyond measure. At the Battle of Kailwa in the advanced Rangoon, African regiments fought so fiercely that even enemy reports noted their endurance. And far away in Europe, North African soldiers from Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia were pushing through Italy's mountains under the Free French Command. They climbed snowy ridges at Monte Cassino, battled through minefields, carried ammunition under constant shell fire. One French general later said, "Without our African divisions, the path to Rome might never have opened." And when the Allies finally entered Paris in 1944, do you know who marched beside them? Senegalese tirailleurs, Algerians, Moroccans, Tunisians. They had crossed oceans, spilled blood, and now they walked beneath the Arc de Triomphe, unseen by history, but not by truth. Behind every statistic was a heartbeat. Behind every regiment, a story. There was Job Masiko, the South African prisoner who blew up a German ship using gunpowder and a tin can, turning captivity into defiance. There was Sergeant Peter Moore of Kenya, who carried wounded comrades for miles through jungle fire in Burma, refusing evacuation until all were safe. There was Corporal Issa of Nigeria, whose unit held a bridge for 2 days under bombardment, armed with little more than courage and bayonets. And there were thousands without recorded names: porters, drivers, stretcher bearers, cooks, nurses. Men and women who fought a war within a war, facing not only enemy bullets, but also racism, segregation, and invisibility. When they returned home, medals were few, their pay was lower, their pensions delayed. In France, African soldiers who liberated Europe were later separated from white comrades in military camps. Some were even disarmed, as if their heroism threatened the old order. They had carried the empire's burden across deserts and oceans. But when peace came, they were left in its shadow. The cost of this war for Africa was enormous. Over 1 million Africans served in World War II. Tens of thousands never came home. Many who survived returned to find their land seized, their families struggling, their sacrifices ignored. In French West Africa, veterans protested unpaid wages and were met with bullets at Thiaroye, Senegal in 1944. The same empires that preached freedom in Europe refused it in Africa, yet something had changed. Those who had seen the world, who had fought shoulder to shoulder with white men, returned with new eyes. They had heard of democracy. They had bled for liberty. And now they asked, if we were good enough to die for you, why are we not good enough to rule ourselves? That question became the seed of a storm. From Ghana to Kenya, from Nigeria to Tanzania, veterans became organizers, activists, leaders. The war that was supposed to secure empire instead planted the roots of independence. In the years after 1945, Africa was not silent. The same men who wore British or French uniforms now marched for their own flags. The veterans of Burma and El Alamein became symbols, proof that Africans had already fought for freedom once and would fight again if they had to. Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, Julius Nyerere in Tanganyika. Many drew inspiration from that generation of soldiers who had stood against the fascists and returned ready to stand against colonizers. Their message was clear. The blood we shed abroad must now water the soil of our freedom. And though few monuments stand to them today, their memory endures in family stories, in village songs, in dusty medals kept in wooden boxes. When we speak of World War II heroes, let's not speak only of Normandy or Stalingrad or Pearl Harbor. Let us speak also of El Alamein, Karen, Kailwa, and Thiaroye, where African blood helped shape the modern world. The story of African soldiers in World War II is not just history, it's legacy. They turned the tide in deserts, jungles, and mountains. They fought wars for empires that denied them names. And in doing so, they rewrote the world's story, even if history books forgot to mention their names. So the next time someone tells you World War II was won by Europe and America, remember the Africans who crossed seas and sands to defend a world that barely saw them. Because empires fade, battles end, but memory endures. If this story moved you, don't let it vanish into silence, like this video. Subscribe to Whisper the Past. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us which part of this story struck you most. And when you're done, check out our other episodes, from the Maji Maji Rebellion to the Queen who defied the British Empire. Because every click, every share keeps these forgotten voices alive, one story at a time.